Cody Martin, who is our presenter today. And for those of you who have not yet worked with Cody, he's our Mail Center Security Director. His experience as a former USPS postal inspector really helps our clients to establish sound mail business center practices. And today he's going to be sharing with you our topic, which is the top 5 ways to enhance your mail center security at your facility. Thanks very much, Cody.
Yep, thanks everyone for joining. This is going to be a little bit shorter than some of the webinars we've done in the past, but we've kind of packed a lot of information in here, and we hope you can take away some things that you can integrate into what you're currently doing. So for those of you who I've worked with in the past, it's good to not really see you all, but to see you all, if that makes sense. Good to connect again. And for those of you who I have not had the chance to work with, thank you for joining up today. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at 5 ways every mailroom can improve security. And when I say mailroom, I'm really talking about maybe a formal mailroom or just an area that's designated for mail screening, depending on what your environment is and what your role is and how you handle your mail screening. Things can look very different, but I think all of these will have some bearing to one degree or another on what you're doing and how you're doing things. So keep that in mind. And then as we're working through these, I really want you to think about how they are specifically relevant to what you have going on. So just think about your scenario, how things are set up, the way processes are run, and apply these things to that particular environment and see how they can integrate. So just do that. And as Nancy said, I want to reiterate, please ask questions along the way. It makes these things much more interactive, and I think we all get a lot out of it. And you may have a really great question that the group can, other people can, use that information later on. So please ask questions. I'll be happy to answer anything on this material or anything in general. And if it's something that's a lot of detail, we can always follow up offline and take care of it that way. So let's get started on the presentation. So one of the things that, I guess the 5 things, let's just start out by highlighting those. We're going to talk about physical layout and how things are arranged in regards to mail security and screening and things of that nature. We're going to talk about some different training methods you can use to kind of enhance what you may already be doing. We're going to talk about documentation as it relates to suspicious mail, questionable mail, things like that. We're going to discuss a Coop and what that is and if you should have one. So we're talking about a continuity of operations plan. And then we're going to talk about some verification specifics, chain of custody and things like that, I think may help you improve some of the current processes you have, or at least give you some food for thought as you are working through different scenarios. So let's talk about physical layout. And this is one of those things that, mailrooms, mail screening areas, they just kind of, oftentimes they tend to evolve over the years. So things just get put in certain places. They tend to get placed wherever it's convenient or where you have room at the time. And that's not always the best case in terms of efficiency. And then also in terms of security, which is really what I like to focus on, right? It always takes precedence. So when we're talking about physical layout, we're going to be thinking about what things can we do to improve those processes, to increase our security posture, and to kind of, elevate our entire program. So there are a few things that go into designing or looking at the physical layout of your mail center, mail screening area, or whatever you want to call it. So the way I always look at these is, anything that we can do to enhance the physical layout is going to greatly improve the process that we have in place. It's going to help with efficiency. It's going to help with security, which is always paramount. However, there has to be some thought put into how this area is set up. And that's what we're going to talk about. Often, we're trying to find a balance between moving the mail, keeping things efficient. We want to maintain a high level of screening while we do this. And it's often they're in direct opposition to one another. It's always this push-pull type scenario. And if this is the case, if you find yourself in that scenario, defer to security every time. And I think that's something that's hard to do, especially if you have high volume. But I do think that a balance can also be found in most cases. So In order to do that, there are a few things that we need to look at or that need to be completed ahead of time to make sure we find that balance, right? So you can see here on the screen, risk assessment. Some of you may have done these, some of you may not have done these, but we have to know what our risk level is and where our vulnerabilities are. And this is something that should be evolving. It should be happening all the time. You know, kind of rule of thumb for a lot of organizations is you do a physical security assessment at least once a year, right? Mail security is part of that, but it often gets kind of left off, or it is not really addressed in much detail. So we want to make sure that it is happening at least once a year, right? Or as new things pop up, and we want to make sure that it's thorough. So we may have to do this risk assessment every year just to respond to the things that are kind of happening in the world around us. You know, based on that, we want to integrate technology, which a lot of you have done already, right? And this comes to this varies in degree of complexity depending on what you find out in that risk assessment. So we're going to, you know, the way I like to look at it, when we identify the risks that we're trying to address, what tools do we need to address those threats? So that could be various types of gear, equipment. It could be additional lighting. It could be the way tables are arranged. It could be all these little things that really, they don't cost any additional money. You already have the infrastructure. It's just the way we look at them or the way we organize them. So we want to look at those and make sure, are we setting these up? Are we, you know, putting the things in place that we need, that we can, you know, there's some things that we can do easily, and there's some things that cost lots of money and take lots of time to put into motion. So we want to take methodical steps, use what we have on the front end, and then backfill that with any additional things that we need to add to that scenario. SOPs, a lot of you have those again already. So again, they have to be created and detail how mail will be processed and screened and what that looks like. This is a living, breathing document as well. As things change, as you rearrange things, as you pick up new vendors, as mail gets dropped off differently, that document is going to change all the time. So you need to be in there, you know, making sure that things are up to date and that that it accurately represents what the physical layout of your mail center is. And that's something to keep in mind as well. And then we have things like health and safety requirements. So, you know, are you integrating, or have you already, you know, you may be considering it, wash stations, you know, eye wash stations, decontamination stations. Do you have fire extinguishers, first aid kits, things like this? You know, and the way I look at it is, if someone, say they're exposed to a white powder letter, and we're looking at the physical layout of your screening area, and they have this, their hands are contaminated, right, with unknown substance. Where do they have to go? Where do they have to travel in order to even do that preliminary initial wash cleanup? Do they have to go through multiple doors? Are they transferring that material onto door handles and things like that? So thinking about solutions to solve some of these easier problems it's all part of the things that go into the physical layout. One of the things that I recommend is for you to lean on the people who are physically doing the work every day. So the folks that are in there, screening mail, whatever that looks like, you know, just simply ask them, do a quick survey, right? Hey, what could we do to make this more efficient, right? How could we rearrange things? And oftentimes it could be, you know, elevating work surfaces, making sure you have ample, adequate light to improve your visibility on powders and liquids, and just unusual markings and things that may seem off on some of these letters and packages. Simple things like that can make a big difference. And then also just allowing adequate space to segregate things that need additional screening, and having the tools and equipment there handy that kind of facilitate that. So that's the kind of stuff that we're talking about with physical layout. It doesn't always involve, you know, knocking down walls and building a standalone structure, right? We're talking reality for the most part here. So it's like the simple things that we can do to improve some of those processes. And that's really what I want you to look at as you're thinking about physical layout. You know, look at your risk, look at the tools that you need to address that, look at your procedures, and make sure that that is evolving as your program evolves, and then factor in those health and safety requirements. And all of that can go into, it's either a direct result of, or it directly goes into changing or manipulating your physical environment to help improve this process, again, with security at the top of mind. So keep that in mind as you're looking at physical layout. Another thing that we talk about a lot, and we offer, and you guys take advantage of a lot, is training. And Outside of mail security, which is the focus of this, training as a whole, I mean, it's very important, right? We always want to continue to improve. We want to make ourselves better, make our teams better. And it's even more important, in my opinion, when it comes to security. And when you're talking about health and safety of not only your people, but secondary folks, as well as infrastructure and all the things that kind of trickle down away from that. So what we would like to do is kind of break it down into 3 different areas here, and I'll kind of summarize it with an example of what some of this enhanced training could look like. Again, one of the keys to mail security preparedness, in my opinion, is practical hands-on training. Like, a lot of the stuff that we do is great. It's important. Refreshers are awesome. Like all the things that we do on a reoccurring basis, it's great. We want to make sure that people are staying up to date on things. But I've found that hands-on, like interactive training, number one, I think people get the most out of it. But number 2, I think it also exposes weaknesses or areas for improvement the best. So what that does is it allows the whole program to improve. So, really what this does is starts with the environment and the mail itself, and kind of merging the 2 into a training program that kind of pushes people a little outside their comfort zone. It's easy to sit behind a computer, go through some coursework and take a test, and that's good for setting up our initial knowledge base. We have to obtain that somehow. We have to get a good threshold for where we are and where we and the knowledge that we have moving forward. And then we need to test that a little bit. And I think that's what we're kind of getting at when we're talking about some of these examples that I'm going to give you. One of the important things is making sure it is set up in a way that allows you to benchmark its effectiveness. So we want the training to be effective. We don't want it to waste people's time. We don't want them to see it as irrelevant or things of that nature, because we really want that buy-in, and that's what we're shooting for here, is that buy-in on their part. So this is critical in mitigating potential risk as a security program as a whole. So what I've seen often is that a lot of time training is directed and focused specifically on the screeners who are interacting with the mail on a day-to-day basis. And it makes sense, right? They get a lot of attention because they're the front lines. They're the ones that are having to handle this stuff on a daily basis. They're going to be the ones that more than likely are the first ones to be on the receiving end of an incident or reporting something. So while this is good, it's great, it's just part of the equation. And training should go from the top down, and we hear that, it's kind of cliche, but the way I look at this is, think about it this way: if you had an incident, a dangerous mail event at your organization, who would be impacted by that internally? Who would play a role during one of these events? Anywhere from the screener who may discover it, up through the security lead, public information officers. Would the CEO need to be briefed on the incident? How far does that span reach, and who all would be involved? In my opinion, is everyone that event would touch and who would have a role in it to some degree or another should be involved in some training, right? To one extent or another. It may look different depending on the person's role within the organization, but there are going to be times where it overlaps as well. So, if you're sitting at the top of the pyramid, you're probably not going to sit through an hour-long, how to screen mail session, but they probably should be involved in, hey, if something really bad happens, how are we going to handle this from a PR standpoint, from a media standpoint? Even if you're just briefing them on what is going to happen and giving them a little feedback, that way they're not caught off guard, right? So we want to make sure that the training incorporates all that. So, the primary focus should be building it around a culture of awareness and efficiency when it comes to, executing SOPs all the way up through emergency procedures. And that's kind of the focus of how we want to roll this out. So when we look at training, we kind of start with the basics, and USPS has some recommendations that we should all be trained on, right? And it's basic security procedures, recognition, reporting of suspicious items, whether that's a letter or a package, PPE use, and then response protocols. And a lot of you have all of these things squared away. This is kind of the baseline of where everyone should start. And anytime we are lacking in one of these, we want to make sure to bring it up to par. And that's kind of where we want things to begin. Now that we have this basic foundation, how can we roll something out that can improve our training capabilities? And I found one of the best ways to do this is through tabletop exercises. And I know I may have mentioned this, at least in theory, to some of you in the past, but it is something that I've found to be very, very effective over the years. I've conducted a ton of these myself. I've participated in them myself, and I've just found them to be really effective when you're kind of limited on other avenues for training. Think about it this way. Try to, and I emphasize try, right? Try to involve anyone who would play a role in this event. That's who we want to invite to it, right? And if possible, we also want to include any relevant, first responders who would play a role. So if that's your local hazmat team, local EOD or bomb tech or bomb squad, if it is, any other outside, police department, sheriff's department, federal partners, et cetera, anybody that you have relationships with in that first responder community, at least try to get a representative to the table during one of these exercises. If you don't know anyone, hey, this is a great time to reach out to them and just to try to make that connection, invite them over, because what it's going to allow you to do is once you get some input on how they operate, they figure out how you operate, it's really going to help these incidents. It's going to help de-escalate them a lot better and a lot easier than if they were just showing up blind to a facility they've never seen before, to an event that they may have not walked through. They have no idea of your capabilities, vice versa. So try to do that. Not always easy, but you're going to find that most often they're really receptive to that. And we did that all the time with different organizations who are doing these things, and I found it to be extremely beneficial. So let's look at it, a few of the components of what a tabletop could look like and how that could be rolled out within your organization. You would need to start with a neutral facilitator, and this needs to be someone who is familiar with your SOPs and your response protocols, but at the same time, it shouldn't necessarily be someone who would have an active role in the event, because we want them to walk through the exercise as well. So if you could designate someone who could at least be briefed up on the SOPs and protocols, and then who could run this, that would be the ideal scenario. Sometimes it may be you, and you're just going to have to remove yourself from the event and play that facilitator role. But we need somebody who is outside of the action to kind of narrate and to push people along through this training exercise. Typically, we want to break it into 3 or so parts, different sections that kind of make sense as natural stopping points. And then each one of those breaks can be used for Q&A and then a transition to the next phase of the scenario. For instance, you could start off your tabletop, you get all your involved parties in a room, provide them whatever material they need. I don't know if you want to use flip charts or whiteboards or whatever. You can split people up by, department or section or however you want to do this, right? There's really no limitations on how you want to do it, but you just want to make sure that people are operating within the role they have at your organization. So for instance, before I get sidetracked, you could get back to the scenario. You could set it up by saying, hey, we've received our mail for the day. We have 5 tubs of USPS mail sitting on the back dock. And, employee A is your screener who usually collects that. You would simply ask them, hey, this has shown up now. What would you do? Tell me how you would go through this process. And they're probably going to tell you, well, I would walk out there. I would, hopefully they would say I would give it a quick visual inspection just to make sure there's nothing obvious. I would bring these into the screening area where they would be placed. We would start doing a sort. Again, we're doing more visual and tactile inspections at this point, looking for anything obvious. And then, maybe at this point in your scenario is where you throw something in. Okay, you're going through this as the narrator, you're telling them, you're going through your sort, and now you've noticed an envelope that has some weird writing on the outside. And you would describe that to them, or you could even have a mock-up of it and you would hand that to them. And what would you do with this, right? And you would let them walk you through that next phase. And you would continue on through this, through the entire event. Maybe we would get to the point where they would contact their supervisor And then there's supervisors hopefully in the room. And then you would ask them, hey, what advice would you give them? What would you tell them to do? And, we really want to get granular on these because we're testing, our processes is what we're doing, and make it known that we're not testing the specific employee. They should know their job, but it's more of the process. So if they need to call a supervisor, where do they find that information? Is it readily available? Do they have a cell phone? Do they have a landline they can make a call on? If their hands have powder all over them, how do they contact somebody outside the screening room if they are covered in powder, right? Maybe they can discard their gloves and wash up if that's available, and then they can make a call. So there's a lot of things that we can really flesh out as we're going through these. And we would go on up through the point of contact and maybe law enforcement, and you could have that representative tell you what they would do. Hazmat would tell you how they would evacuate, and you may ask them, hey, if you guys show up, how would you evacuate us? They would tell you, and then you can work with them to determine the best evacuation areas and staging areas. And these are really things that can help fine tune your program in kind of this optimal type scenario where when it does, or if it does happen, you have already gone through this with the exact people who are going to be in the event with you. So everybody knows what to do. They already have it in mind. And that really, I'm telling you, I know I'm kind of harping on this a little bit. The effort that it takes to put into these, which is kind of minimal outside of the organizing part of it, you're going to get your return on investment is going to be super high. So if you can pull this off, if you need a little help, contact me offline. I'd be happy to help you do this because, again, extreme value in setting one of these up. So just to reiterate on a couple of these, involve as many people as you can who would be involved in these events, to whatever capacity. Go ahead and document your training as you should all of your training, right? Identify any areas of weakness that you have, and then you can conduct follow-up training just to address those specific areas if you need to. So, it serves multiple purposes here. Really what it does and kind of the big scheme of things is that it helps employees kind of strengthen their grasp of the SOPs, and what that does is increase your overall security effectiveness. But highly recommended that you set one of these up if you haven't done so. And again, if you need a little bit of assistance, we'd be glad to talk you through a few things on Tabletop Exercises. All right, so let's move on to the third way we can improve our mailroom security, and that's through documentation. And what I'm specifically talking about here is suspicious mail, and I would even probably go as far as saying questionable mail. So things that just maybe aren't quite right? It doesn't, maybe they don't meet that suspicious mail threshold, but they're just for whatever reason just kind of weird. There are a lot of organizations, I've come to find out over the years, that handle these type of things internally, right, with little to no involvement from first responders. First of all, it may not reach the level of involving first responders, and then secondly, a lot of organizations want to handle this internally. They don't want the publicity, their potential publicity, and all of the other side effects that come with inviting other folks in to handle these things. So they take care of as much as they can before they turn that event over. So what happens is this is typically on the front end of an event where there is, we may deem these incidents insignificant. A little's done about it. It's like ends up being nothing, but there's still something weird there. And I find that's where kind of things fall off, and there's the gray area. What happens? Well, let's back that up. Some examples of these might be, eccentric mailings that contain weird writings. We've all seen those. It could be some written threat, and it may not be like I'm going to blow up your building, but it just may something like, hey, you're going to get what's coming to you, right? Some of those more ambiguous type, we know it's kind of implied there, but there's nothing articulated, there's nothing specific. And there's all other kinds of weird related stuff, right? These are often the first indication of someone who is, or who has a potential to escalate the threats, right? What they're doing, they're going to escalate what they're doing. And I say this a lot, and it's because I've seen it throughout my career, and it's true. These types of folks, if they do not get the kind of response they want, they often escalate their tactics, right? They have a desired outcome in their mind. They are doing it for a reason. And if that is not achieved, they are going to up the ante until they get what they're looking for. Now, they sometimes may get what they're not looking for, which is going to jail and all of these things, which is the best outcome. But sometimes it actually culminates in something bad happening at your organization. And that's what we're trying to avoid here. So as a result of all this, documentation is paramount. It's not only beneficial from internal standpoint, if you're doing your own threat analysis through your security folks, but it's also extremely valuable to law enforcement if and when they become involved. Looking back at my career, if I would have responded to an incident or to something that's that warranted me showing up and actually taking investigative action, and the caller said, "Hey, I don't know if this is related, but here's 5 things that we've received in the past, and here's all the details and photos and like all of this information to support that." That's like a gold mine for me and puts me out way ahead of the game in terms of an investigation and how that goes. So having this type of stuff just to turn over can be invaluable in shortening the length of bringing this thing to some sort of resolution. So, with that in mind, I guess it brings the questions of what information should we document and how should we maintain it? And that's really kind of what we're getting at here. And, as with most things, this is very subjective, and you're going to have to determine that answer kind of as it relates to your organization and security posture. But there are some things that we can look at in general, in kind of broad, sweeping a viewpoint. In a nutshell, we need to be documenting, again, anything that raises to that level of being questionable, I would say. At a minimum, something you just think suspicious, so it has a little bit more of those weird things going on. And once you identify something that meets that level, wherever you set that, it's time to document it. And that's as elaborate as it is. What do we document? So you can see some things here that seem like common sense, but often they're not, or we just get lazy or we get complacent and we don't document all of this stuff. Pictures and, pictures of everything, I guess, is the best way to elaborate on it, right? If you have a package, I'm talking about we're getting pictures from every angle, we're getting, barcodes, we're getting cancellation stamps, we're getting, what does the tape look like? If we can get, decent images of the tape, what type of adhesive, anything that can kind of connect mailings together. We want to have that information. So if you have this on all of these suspicious items as they're coming in, it makes it much easier to put the pieces of the puzzle together later on if it culminates in an investigation. And then we have just the simple things like sender and addressee and postage and unusual markings and all this other stuff that kind of goes without question. The big thing is we want detailed, crisp images. And a lot of times that is, instead of just getting a blown up overview of the package, right? So when we used to do crime scenes, you would do your general overview, then you do like a medium range shot, then you do a close-up shot, right? So you'd have all 3 of those of the same thing to kind of put this thing together. And that's kind of what we're looking for here. And it seems like a little overkill, but in reality, you're probably not receiving that many suspicious items on a daily basis, probably not even on a weekly basis. So the time that it takes to do this is kind of minuscule in the big scheme of things, right? So in addition to that, if you deem that this is safe, say there's just some weird writing on the outside and you don't detect anything else inside, and there's just maybe some letter or some sheets of paper, you end up opening it up and there's just some weird writings. There's nothing there, nothing that law enforcement should get involved with. Consider physically maintaining that mail piece for a certain amount of time, right? This is an extremely viable alternative, especially if the suspicious items you receive on the lower end in terms of mail volume. Just maintain them. I mean, that's going to be the best evidence if it ever comes to that. Maybe you have a file cabinet or some lockable storage there in your screening area that allows you just to file it away, some sort of methodical procedure, and it's just out of sight, out of mind unless you need it. So another thing to consider, is using the mail secure device. I mean, there's a camera on there, there's video, there's photo capabilities. You can use that to take pictures and to take video and to store that until it's easily accessible later, right? So you could do it once a week and you could just pull that off there. You could do it. You could pull that information off after you're done with your screening and sorting for the day, right? It just kind of gives you some flexibility to in regards to timing and access to tools and equipment. So keep that in mind as well. But the bottom line is, be sure to document. Oftentimes this could be just throwing things in a spreadsheet and sharing that, like Google Sheets, and keeping a tab for years or months or whatever, and listing things out, and you can add images in there and all of that kind of stuff, and then sharing it with all relative folks that are on the team. And then, when it's needed, it's there. It can be turned over to law enforcement or whoever needs it. Easy way to do that. All right, let's talk about a Coop, what a Coop is, and how or why you may need one, and then kind of what goes into putting one of these things together. So for those of you, who have worked with the government or some organizations that have these in place, a Coop is an acronym for Continuity of Operations Plan. It's something that we used all the time in the government, and what it does is it's a plan that allows essential operations to continue functioning during critical incidents, and that's all that it is. They're often, again, used within the government, but not as much in the private sector. Even though I've been seeing more and more organizations put these into place. They sometimes call them business continuity plans, but whatever you call it, it is basically allows you to keep essential operations going during critical incidents. That critical incident could be a dangerous mail event at your facility, at your headquarters, wherever. So that's why I feel like these things should be strongly considered. Now, out of all of the things that we're going to talk about today, this is probably the one that takes the most time and effort and energy. I mean, they're not easy. You don't just throw it together, but they can be extremely, extremely valuable in terms of how, in terms of being an important component of responding to an event outside of your SOPs, which deal specifically with that mail component itself. This kind of has the overlap into the rest of the business organization, and this is how they would continue to function. So thinking about it this way, it's extremely, or I should say it's especially relevant for companies who rely on incoming and outgoing mail. Like if that's part of your daily business function, this could be extremely relevant. Or if you think about a scenario where a mail related shutdown would have some sort of detrimental impact on business. Like if you rely on that, it's an important part of your business function, your business operation. We need to think about one of these. Okay. They can, these types of events sometimes have a huge impact on business operations. And, when these things happen, there are often essential business functions that need to be maintained as operational, if that makes sense. So if your mailroom was to go down and there was some affected, real estate space around it that was to go down due to an event, how would that impact the overall operation of your business? Maybe not at all. It may shut, or it may shut you down. So we need to think about those things, right? When you activate your Coop, let's talk about just activation of these plans. It depends on a lot of factors, but the overall objective is to kind of reestablish operations as soon as, as quickly as possible in response to an unplanned event. Say you get some sort of a biological attack. It's like, how long do we need, and when and how would we want to respond to get things functional if that part of the business was shut down? So the event type, if you think about it, the event type and outcome will have a direct correlation on how long operations may be shut down. White powder like hoaxes, they're inconvenience, at best. A lot of times, worst case, hoax you may be shut down for 4 or 5 hours, while you're getting things, getting a response, getting things cleaned up, all of that type of stuff. In comparison, a legitimate biological threat could have you shut down for weeks or months, depending on how long decontamination, all the related tasks take. So this is something to keep in mind, especially for high risk industries. And I want you to think about that as we're kind of discussing what the Coop should look like. In addition to mail related events, a well-designed Coop can also help you prepare for other unplanned events, right? Such as, the pandemic that gets thrown around a lot, but think about it. That was an unplanned event that displaced, that had a major impact on operations. A lot of people had to try to figure out how to adjust and to get business up and running. even schools and pretty much every part of society had to come up with a way to live in this virtual world almost overnight. And we hadn't thought about that really in the past. It wasn't really a thing on a large scale. So, when we're looking at these specific types of events, kind of imagine worst case scenario and your mailroom shut down for a significant amount of time. What would that look like, right? And how long would you be out of commission, and what would you need up and running? So that's something that we want to think about. When you start creating your Coop, you have a few things that you're going to have to look at, right? So first thing is, have you performed a risk assessment, which most of you should have, and that should be an ongoing thing. What are the risks that need to be addressed? So that is something that's very important as well. We're gonna take care of that in our SOPs. What is the scope of your plan? So is this something that just affects like where your mailroom's at and some of the adjacent physical, located business functions, or is it something that is like a broad scale, affects your business as a whole? So you got to think about the scope of this and how big it needs to be. What are the critical functions that need to be maintained? Does it strictly cover mail operations, or does it cover these other business functions as well? What other business functions relies on the mail for continued operation? And then think about this also: how long can your mailroom be down before the Coop would need to be activated, right? So if you're thinking, well, if our mailroom's down for a day and we would have to get other things up and running, then that's something you need to look at, right? So whenever you're considering these, you should consider all those factors in addition to many others when you're creating your plan. Once the plan's created, you need to test it. And that's where that tabletop exercise comes into play, right? You can integrate it into those tabletop exercises. And then you need to refine those areas that didn't perform or function as expected. This can be and should be an ongoing process as threats evolve, as your business structure evolves. But again, Coop is something that takes a lot of work, takes a lot of involved parties, a lot of people sitting in nice offices have to sign off on it, so it's not something that's done overnight. But again, if your mailroom plays a critical role in keeping business running, you should definitely look at creating one of these, and have that in place in case something does pop up that it is unexpected. The last thing we're going to talk about is verification. So a lot of times we've referenced this in regards to chain of custody, and we talk about the verification process a lot because it plays an important role. And for those of you who don't know or need a little bit of a refresher, chain of custody basically includes anyone and everyone who have handled a particular mail piece and the path that is taken all the way from being dropped off in the mail stream to arriving at the intended recipient. So chain of custody is very important because it provides a trail we can follow to either verify the legitimacy of a mailing, or on the other end of the spectrum, it can help us verify a level of suspicious nature, right? So we're moving it up or down that chain appropriately. Both of these are important functions of a well-oiled mail security program, if you want to look at it that way. It involves you to handle a lot of these things on your own without involving other people. And it also allows you to have kind of a baseline of information to hand over once you do involve other folks. So a few of the common things that we can do to verify chain of custody, we always start with the addressee. That's where I like to start, right? So when something shows up and it is questionable, right? You go to the addressee, whoever it's addressed to. Hopefully there's a name there. If not, if it's just addressed to, CEO, that's automatically elevating, right, the level of suspicion there. But, you can go to the person, just ask them, hey, are you familiar with the sender's information? Here's who it's from, name, address, etc. Ask them if they know, and they may tell you yes or no, right? Knowing that these are often fraudulent, it also allows us to verify a certain level of suspicion. If they say, hey, I don't know who this is, and then you try to do a little background on it, which we'll talk about in a minute, you may easily identify this as a made-up thing or a bogus address, and that automatically turns it up a notch. Okay, is this person expecting the mail piece? If they are expecting it, what are the dimensions they're expecting? Does it match what they're expecting? If it doesn't, would there be any reason to be receiving mail from a certain geographic area or from a certain business? Just basic questions that take half a minute to confirm. The other thing that I like to do at that point is actually contact the sender, or try to. We may not have all the information, right? You can use things like publicdata.com if you have an account with them, or other public information resources to track down a lot of contact info for people. But you can just search that, find the information if you can. And, I've done it in the past, and it may be outside your comfort zone, but give them a call and just see who answers, and ask them, hey, have you mailed something recently to this address or this business? And let them see what they say, yes or no. If they say yes, well, it's like, hey, you mind telling us who did you mail that to? See if they can actually confirm who it's addressed to, because you're going to start unraveling a few things when you're asking these questions. Then you can ask them, hey, do you mind, we just got a security program in place, do you mind describing the contents of this mailing for me? And let them describe to you what they say is in there, and see if that matches what you're seeing, what you're feeling, etc. Right? Just some other simple things. Is the mailing from a known sender, like known vendors? Is it from Amazon? Is it from a business partner? Things like that. And then, one other little thing that just popped to mind is, be sure to always compare the sender address. If they put an address, the return address on there, and they're going to have their city, state, zip code, just compare that zip code to the zip code on the cancellation stamp. If they have a return address of Toledo, and the cancellation mark says it was processed in Tampa, Florida, that's a big discrepancy there, right? And I mean, that can happen from time to time, but it's not often that people are mailing things, 6 states away from where they live. So that's just another piece of the puzzle that you can take a look at when it comes time to trying to verify some of this stuff. As you work through this process, you're going to be able to start to put together information that allow you to make a decision on whether you can de-escalate, or if you have to escalate, right? If it's deemed suspicious, you're going to go ahead and follow those SOPs. If it's not, then hey, let's go ahead and document it like we mentioned before, and get that recorded, and then move on with our day. If you do have to contact first responders, be sure to provide them any information that you've dug up during this verification process. It could help speed things up quite a bit. Again, you can also, if you were to call EOD Secure, for some reach back, just providing EOD Secure with that info can help out quite a bit. And, we often get the question on, well, how do we do this? How do we screen, or how do we verify this stuff for big boxes? It's always the question, right? Big boxes. So fortunately, we rarely have to consider threats that are extremely large in nature. But if you do, this same process applies, right? Everything that we've talked about right here is going to apply to larger boxes and parcels as well. So just use that to kind of clear these things. And worst case scenario, you identified as suspicious. You call your local first responders or postal inspectors. They show up. They're like, yeah, this is suspicious. They're going to X-ray it for you and give you an interpretation and be on their way. But we want to exhaust all of these things before, right? They're not going to show up every day and X-ray for you, but they are there when you need them. So take advantage of it if it warrants. So that just kind of wrap up what we've talked about a little bit. We've talked about physical layout and what that should look like. We've talked about training and the implementation of tabletop exercises, which highly recommended. Documentation, again, make sure you're doing that, make sure you're being detailed. Let's talk about Coop. We've talked about that and what it should look like. Extremely detailed process, but extremely worth it if your business relies on that function. And then just verification, chain of custody verification. Again, something that's extremely important, pretty easy to do once you kind of get over the jitters of just reaching out to people like that. But it does make a big difference in how you can handle these incidents. Just real quick to reiterate on what Nancy said earlier, if you have any questions, please ask those now. If not, you can follow up with us later. And then, be sure to provide us feedback on what you would like to see in these quarterly webinars. We want to cater these to what is relevant and going on for you all. So just make sure that you let us know, and we'll try to put something together to address what's on your mind as well. And that is it for my part.
Thank you so much, Cody. I feel as though we were thinking that this would be maybe half hour, but I think we could probably do a full session on each of these, right? Maybe that's something we want to consider. But I do have a question, and I'm going to read it out right now. So considering chemical chemical power or chemical powder, email or mail-borne threats, are eye washing capabilities an essential component of the basic mail screening location and setup? So I think the typos over there, I think it's chemical powder and mail-borne threats.
Yeah.
So do you consider an eye washing essential as a locate, or is it more of a decontamination section?
Yeah, I would say that it's not as, for me, the essentials is having something available where you can just do a basic wash up, not necessarily an eye wash or eye flush station. So to your point, to me, it's much more important to have a way to discard any PPE that we have efficiently, right? And kind of, hands free, and then be able to clean up with just the basic soap and water type thing, right? Before we have to go through a facility, opening doors, cross-contaminating, using a shared bathroom, things like that. So I would say a basic wash station is more important than, trying to figure out how to do a, eye wash component to that.
I had a there's as we're waiting for more questions to come on, I did have a
Yep.
question at one point, and was when we were doing some of these, a lot of questions came up with the actual restroom that was closest to the mail center was actually a women's restroom. What are your thoughts
Yeah.
on that? And could you speak on that point? Just to continue on that thought.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's like one of those things where if we're dealing with a legitimate scenario, then it's kind of like some rules may go to the wayside, right? But the bigger problem there would be if you're to go into a shared bathroom to do this cleanup, right? And then you do this thing, maybe nobody's in there, and then you remove yourself to go initiate kind of your procedures and as a response to this. What happens in the meantime, right? So there could be people that are going in there, they're touching door handles, they're touching faucets. If we're talking about a legitimate threat now, we've kind of spread that throughout the facility, even if it's a short distance. So, a lot of times we don't have any power over that. We're not able to build bathrooms and wash stations and stuff like that. So we make do with what we have. However, those are things that we should take into consideration, right? So maybe those scenarios where hopefully they're wearing PPE. That's why gloves are so important, because at least you can discard those. You have somewhat of a clean, decontaminated hand that allows you to access that next area where you can clean up. But at that point, I would definitely shut things down and make sure that nobody has access to it until you can confirm that it's a non-hazardous event.
Good points. Excellent. Thank you. Any other questions that we have here? Yes, there's one more question. So trusted delivery source list, logging books, landline phone, decontamination station, X-ray or other penetrating imaging systems like the Mail Secure. I like to hear that. Mail handling unit, glove box, first aid kit, is it crucial or okay, any first aid item that is crucial and may not be usually be placed in a typical first aid kit that would be required. Suspicious package indicator poster, do not enter mail being screened poster, PPE gloves, suits, types of masks. So these are the list of the things that we have inside the mailroom itself. Sorry, so I missed that first line. So yeah, that was a excellent
well done.
list.
Yeah, well done.
But to the
way beyond most people. Yeah, you've got most things covered. So
there was one question in there. Sorry, there was one question in there. Is that just general first aid kits? Do they contain all of the items that you would generally need, or is there anything else that we should consider within that first aid kit?
No, and that's kind of a I would think just your normal. Well, we're not talking about like a small compact size first aid, right? But if you have like a normal environmental safety style first aid kit, it's going to have everything that you need. And to kind of take the sexiness out of it, we're not talking about really with that component's more of responding to just your everyday things, right? That you're going to encounter dealing with packages and mail, and they're clean up, having alcohol swabs and things of that nature, but more or less, being able to treat just not to minimize it too much, but just the normal minimal type injuries that you would have interacting with this type of stuff. It's more on just the environmental health and safety side of it, more so than the dangerous mail side of it. So having that again, gives the workspace just that much more functionality and allows things to be kind of self-contained without having to, go throughout the facility to address small issues.
Okay. And I have another great question here. Oh my gosh. What is the best way to notify incoming delivery trucks during an incident to reroute? For example, UPS, FedEx, Amazon, USPS, etc.
Yeah, you're probably not going to be able to get a hold of them en route to reroute, but what you would probably have to do if you're expecting them, or just to kind of mitigate some of that, is you're going to have somebody that's posted up redirecting traffic, right? So if you have an incident going on in your mailroom and that goes right up to your back dock, wherever deliveries come in and trucks come in, you need to post somebody up out there and just to let them know, hey, we've got an incident going on. We need you to reschedule or come back another time. If it really kicks off and you have an event happening, first responders are going to take care of that for you once it gets to that point. But there is that bridge, that window in the middle where you're going to have to maintain some of those functions until you get relieved by the authorities.
Excellent. Any other questions that we have for Cody? In the meantime, if there's anything else that you want to send us to either of our emails, we'd be more than happy to answer those as they come along during your days. So thanks so much for this. This has been, if there are no more questions, we just want to be really mindful of time as well. I want to thank everybody. I just want to take one last peek to make sure there's nobody have any questions. That's fantastic. Thanks so much, everybody. Thanks so much for your time. And it was wonderful seeing you guys again. It's kind of feels weird to say like Happy New Year because it's our first of the year, but tune into our next quarterly webinars as well. And again, please reach out and definitely let us know what it is that's top of mind and for our topics. Oh, one last question maybe we can squeeze in. Oh, do you have a written Coop template?
I would have to look and see, to be honest with you. I don't know that I have a template, but that might be something that we could look at putting together. I don't have one readily available.
And that maybe is our
maybe
next
that's something that we
topic.
can look at. Yeah,
Fantastic.
So we might look at that for sure.
Excellent. Very good. Thank you all so very much, everybody, once again. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.